And we're back after a 2-week hiatus because this is the Non-Existent Story, a storytelling podcast, which was weekly. It is now fortnightly. So
that's every 2
belongs
weeks.
to the. Ah, yes. You could look up that word, or Hannah could just tell you what it means. So, in addition to being one of the few storytelling podcasts that is involves creative content as well as reviews or reacquaintances with classics, we are also one of the few fortnightly podcasts. This week, or this fortnight rather, Hannah will be presenting 2 stories, a summary and an excerpt from one that is published and the one that she has made up. And I, and by extension, you guys will guess which is which. Welcome, Hannah, who today is coiffed as like Heidi. Is this like the Heidi look?
Sort of like an immersion, a mesh of Princess Leia and Heidi. I was going for kind of a solidarity piece with that, so I think it turned out pretty well.
Yes, I can see sort of many things happening. You don't know how I feel about it.
It's sort of a
very youthful.
Yeah, but
and what are you drinking
at the same time? Radiant Red. This isn't a promotion of them. It's just what I'm drinking. But
promote them if they would like to sponsor and promote us. There could be some mutual promotion. I'm drinking. I don't even remember what it's called. I always drink Malbec. So this is a $14 Malbec. That's how which is like mid-range for me. Anything over 2 digits. Well, Hannah, what have you brought us? What have you brought me? And by extension, us.
Well, I've brought you the usual, but in my normal and unusual way. So without further ado, I'll jump right into my 2 stories, which are on the topic of waiting. WAITING, waiting.
Oh, so, not like lifting weights.
No, like waiting to lift weights.
I'm always doing that. I never really get to it.
But okay,
waiting.
Yes, waiting. Waiting to start reading. Be another example.
Like waiting for Godot, kind of waiting. Okay. Like, are we still waiting for? Is this actually the podcast?
So, story 1.
So meta.
I think I've made my point. Story 1. 3 years have passed since Japanese planes struck Pearl Harbor. Nondescript government officials, some in starched uniform, some in 3-piece suits, which are another kind of uniform, and one, a secretary in rayon stockings, gather in a Washington conference room. The room, like the officials, is nondescript, except for the dark walnut table and its centerpiece, a red telephone. The officials have narrowed their selections to 2 alternate courses of action, and these they circulate in folders and discuss. Meanwhile, 2 men wait at their desks. The colonel is a pilot, prone to quick movement and dry speech. He drums his fingers and watches the clock. To him, the clock is ticking louder than the whirring jet engines' incessant barking from the flight hangar to which his office is adjacent. They escorted Little Man onto his plane this morning, and since then the guard dog has barked. The colonel drums his fingers more quickly, waiting. They have installed a new telephone in his office. It is red. The espionage operative does not drum his fingers. It is an annoying habit. He grinds his teeth instead. His desk is 200 miles from the colonel's, and his office is larger because it is communal. The team has shared it and the lab since Project Who Me began. The lab is stocked with vials, all foul-smelling, horribly, awfully foul-smelling, and also precious. The team is uncharacteristically quiet. Anxiety is in the air, another smell. The operative admires his secret love, a dark-haired French woman who chats with other lab techs. None of them look at the tank frothing with SAC-23, a compound they have dubbed U.S. Government Standard Bathroom Malodor. The last 2 years have been dedicated to its creation, but now that it is ready, no one looks. Similarly, they do not look at the operative's desk, upon which sits a newly installed red telephone. It has been 2 or 3 hours. and most of the officials are in accord. Not all of them, but it is enough. The secretary types the final memo. One official signs, while another reaches across the dark walnut table to the red telephone and makes the call. And that is the end of story 1. You have any questions? For clarity in the
right, so we're in a room where we're awaiting orders. We have some descriptions of various things that I'll talk about or ask you about later because I like them. And then there's also a lab, and the lab is adjacent, or are we in the lab, or is it just nearby? What's the relationship between the waiting room and the lab? That's my question.
Right. There are 3 rooms in this story. The first is in Washington. That is the only location that we're given, and it's filled with government officials, and they're making some kind of decision. And this is 3 years after Pearl Harbor. Also, in the same period, right before the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. So they're making some decisions. Then in another undisclosed location, which is attached to a flight hangar, we have the colonel. And then in the third undisclosed location, which we only know is 200 miles away from the colonel's office, is the lab and the lab office.
Okay, thank you. All right, so you might have said that, but I might have missed it while I was jotting down notes. Okay, so 3 places, only one of which we know where it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
Yes. All right, I will now be reading the dramatic excerpt, which is accompanied by Dana Boulet's sad French accordion, if it will cooperate with me.
Oh.
Can you hear it?
Yes. I wasn't expecting French music for this.
The operative speculates how many projects were funded, and how many men are waiting now, like him, by their phones. His team has met their objective, exceeded it even. The compound, lining the walls in clear plastic capsules, is ready for Chinese resistance distribution. The capsules are small, pressure sensitive, and inconspicuous. Range is 10 feet, no backfire. Activation, silent. U.S. government standard bathroom malodor is rainproof, soap-proof, solvent-proof. And revolting like a very loose bowel movement. It hits first with a sweet note, encourages a deeper inhale than spikes of sulfur, of onions. The nasal memory is gag-inducing. To discourage this train of thought, he studies the French woman, sees that she is preoccupied, smiles wanly at her. The operative is a man of science, not psychology, and does not see why the phone must be read, as if he might otherwise lose it on his desk beneath notebooks and papers. He suspects the French woman knows why. She is the insight on the team. She is the one to postulate that their compound, SAX-23, will be more effective on the Japanese than the Germans. The Germans, she says, I mean the German soldier. He will make light of such things. You see, the German uses civility to mask beastliness, but the Japanese, he is humiliated by such things. The Japanese uses civility to mask shame. She speaks with unquestioned authority, the team's lone European. The operative imagines her beside him in an outdoor cafe with a cigarette and they're ashamed of everything, she sighs. That's the end of my dramatic reading.
Excellent. Who is this woman?
She is part of the lab team.
Okay. So is she civilian or military? Or is she like a contract?
She's a lab tech.
Civilian.
Probably a civilian. She is French. I mean, it is unlikely. But they're all lab tech types in the library. We don't know about the espionage operative. He might not be a civilian, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's military. But the rest of the team is more like lab techy.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. And if you are ready, I will read story 2.
I am so ready.
Okay. A Canadian accountant sits patiently at Lounge 19A in Wing D of Terminal 4. He shyly takes note of a beautiful Ghanaian woman. They are but two of many passengers who sit or stand or pace and wait for the fog to lift. Hours stretch, and airline personnel make assurances and serve crackers and purple tea. A Bulgarian poet intermittently sleeps and quizzes the Canadian accountant from his crossword puzzle. Children play games, and surrounding restaurants run steadily lower on cheese and coffee creamer. Passengers complain at the gate. Airline personnel placate and offer more tea. A Honduran woman watches the local news. Night falls, and pillows and blankets are distributed as some locals go home and others search fruitlessly for hotels. The next morning, all gather to watch the TV. A cholera epidemic is sweeping through the city. The fog remains. Airline personnel discourage passengers from leaving the terminal, and outside soldiers circle the tarmac. Hours pass. There is an enormous crash, and the power goes out. A meteor, the TV tells us, has struck the airport. But Terminal 4 remains intact. Passenger subgroups select delegates, who appoint judges for an Olympiad. And for 2 days, passengers compete in volleyball, tennis, synchronized walking, carpet polo, stroller bobsledding, boxing, and a beauty pageant. Are distributed, and passengers slip into post-Olympic malaise. No functioning toilets remain. The accountant and the Ghana woman exchange gossip, but do not discuss their respective ex-spouses. Warlord, currently closing in. Librarian, currently dating a podiatrist. Airline personnel offer more purple tea. They have run out of crackers. The following morning, the Cubans incite what passengers they can to rebellion. They will kill the soldiers and fly the plane themselves. The Canadian accountant and the girl from Ghana behold the battle from the lounge window. They hear the jets, then a crash. Airline personnel are happy to report that the rebels stole the wrong plane, that the remaining passengers' flights should depart momentarily when the fog lifts and the electricity returns and quarantine ends and the control tower is rebuilt. Restaurants are out of everything. Passengers commence to fight amongst themselves. Soldiers counterattack, and soon all are killed but the Canadian accountant, the woman from Ghana, and a small Mongolian boy. A giant air balloon smacks against the window, and the three climb on it as a furious warlord paces into the terminal with a machine gun and machete. The three survivors rise gracefully into the wind amidst the gunfire. That is story 2. Dramatic excerpt from which will be accompanied by Kathleen Martin's performance of Cantique de Noël. Yes.
An even more dramatic excerpt from an already extremely dramatic sequence of events. That must be the most action-packed summary that I've ever heard. Many things happened.
It's quite a lot, so you've got to keep up, and it deliberately needs to be presented quickly. So
yes, I feel like that's key to the tone.
Very much so. So we're going to try to calm it down a little bit with this dramatic reading to give you a moment.
It's like the heartbeat of a hummingbird right now.
A young Bolivian woman gives birth in the bookstore, the manager himself delivering, while in a restroom an old Kazakh man is bitten by a tiny blue snake. A species of viper, says one local, a species of adder, says another. The viper or adder escapes through a crack in the tile. The Kazakh dies and is buried in a planter. All of the women in the lounge begin menstruating simultaneously. A tampon is worth a bottle of champagne, then 2 bottles, then a case. The men of each subgroup huddle, discuss suicide. The cold has gone treacherous, and as darkness at last descends, all extra seats are destroyed for fuel. The bookstore is dismembered for kindling, the manager at first resisting, then remembering his insurance and standing aside. Each fire is tended gently, but in the morning there are new claims of theft, missing Marlboros, missing Kents. The delegates meet desperately. The Belgian suggests a spelling bee and is beaten senseless. The girl from Ghana tells the Canadian that things will soon go bad, that she has been in similar situations and always things go bad. She asks if he has any skills that might be useful. I'm a whiz at analyzing the puncture impact on leverage. Anything else? I've been known to make adequate preparations for balloon maturity. Just then, on the far side of the wing, the Greek defeats the Turk at tic-tac-toe, announces that the Cyprus question has been reopened. The Turk pushes the Greek. The Greek pushes the Turk. Sides are drawn up, only 2 of them now, and there is punching and kickboxing and taekwondo. There is pinching and biting and scratching. The soldiers kick down the boarding gate door, are attacked by passengers bearing burning armrests and broken bottles of Moet et Chandon. The girl from Ghana drags the accountant into a corner and lays herself across him. There is automatic weapons fire and jolt of grenades, shouting and screams, and then silence. Okay. And so ends the second dramatic reading.
Wow. That is extraordinarily rich in details. So to give a sort of structure to my reflections and questions, I think I have a sense that there's actually 2 different kinds of waiting. There are 2 different atmospheres of waiting going on here, but that they both, interesting, have a certain apocalyptic quality to them, and that is perhaps intrinsic to extreme experiences of waiting. Because the waiting and the sense of anxiety is bolstered by this sense of imminent destruction or self-destruction or unleashing of some sort of preternatural forces. But the tone and the tones are a little bit different though, and but there's a humor as well, as generally there are in your even your most horrific tales.
I try.
And we thank you. We thank you for that. We thank you for your service. Okay, so in the first one, which I am, and I sorry for resorting to these comparisons, but because of the insistent image of the red phone and the sense of a transition from a war drama to Cold War, which is basically eons of geopolitical waiting, and whose symbol is like the red phone. Like the red phone for me is like a very Cold War thing. So that it seems to me to kind of evoke a sort of Kubrick-ish, like Doctor Strangelove kind of experience. A little bit, because of the insistence not on like scenes of battle, but on these behind the scenes communication networks where a sort of crossing of wires or a misunderstanding could potentially result in something, and also no one has any idea what's going on, which seems to be important somehow in things about the military, which we could discuss later if you want, or any large institution for that matter. So I guess what I wanted to ask you first is, what do you think are the details here that give this a sense of tension? Like where does the sense of waiting come from? Because we're in these very compact stories in both of them. But here, what do you think like the tension and the sense of time expanding comes from?
That is sort of a unique balance that I find between inaction and isolation or confinement. I think that particular combination lends itself to a special sort of buildup and anxiety that a lot of people can relate to. Because you're not able to act. That is the essence of waiting, is things are happening outside of your control. And there are so many expectations that these people have to perform. There's a level of expertise that may be called upon, but they don't know. And in the meantime, it's just kind of a silence where you imagine the inner workings of their mind, which they have to contain because they're just waiting.
It's interesting because on the one hand, it seems to in this story, you get this sense of anxiety with the fingers tapping and the clock ticking, and the hand poised over the phone, and the evoking these very menacing but also kind of humorous. Also made me think of Vonnegut, though I'm not I don't know Vonnegut very well. Humor maybe made me think a little bit of Vonnegut, like very intellectual but also kind of like potty humor at certain times. But yeah, so I think that on the one hand, there's a sense of anxiety and people getting annoyed by other things, and like, just thinking about the future, which is kind of what anxiety is. But at the same time, when things are, as you say, so isolated, all these sensorial details really rise to the surface. And so like the walnuts and the sound of the clock versus the sound of the fingers, and the different smells, which are also related in turn to this kind of like nuclear apothecary. I imagine all these like vials with like these strange labels, because they're like these outrageous, like ludicrous things, almost like kind of it made me think a little bit of like some of the supposedly, because no one ever has any proof because it's conspiracy, but one of the many ways that the U.S. tried to kill Fidel Castro was like poisoning his toothpaste so that his beard would fall out, and then he would literally and figuratively lose face before his people. So yeah, I guess I was just struck, and you can comment on further, but it's not really a question, but I was just struck at how the scenario of waiting seems to demand descriptive details, and those details seem to jump out with a certain sense of urgency that they might not in other kinds of flows of action.
Yeah, I do. I think that makes sense. Any kind of emotionally traumatic kind of scenario that people find themselves in, there's that tendency to focus on the minuscule detail that doesn't necessarily matter in order to avoid thinking about the greater thing that might be going on in the back of their mind. So focusing on a piece of furniture or a color or a thought or a sound, as opposed to what's actually happening or what you think is about to actually happen.
And do we think that, or is it clear in the original or not, is this the decision to bomb Hiroshima? Is this what's at stake? Or is that just kind of suggested along with any number of other outrageous U.S. reactions?
I think it's pretty strongly suggested, because it's not covered in the excerpt that I chose, but the section where the pilot is waiting, and it says that Little Man has been escorted onto his plane. Little Man was the name of the first bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima.
Okay. So there's a wink towards that.
Yeah, and then I think Fat Boy was the name of the second bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki 3 days later. So there's some pretty very specific details. Kind of scattered there to tell you this is absolutely what they're waiting for,
without actually having. And I think that's actually really cool, because if you were to say up front, this is a story about the bombing of Japan, the effect would be totally lost and it would be totally different. So I don't know, do you think that I mean, because you're dealing with kind of it's a loaded topic, right? Like, U.S. reactions or U.S. plotting around this decision to exterminate an enormous number of innocent people. So what do you think is achieved, and like what do you think is like lost or gained, or literally or in other senses, by making the references to the fact that it's about the bombing of Japan much more oblique? Is there, and like maybe what are some of the problems?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's a question that the story attempts to address.
Well, in your opinion.
In my opinion, I guess I hadn't considered it from that perspective. It was more of a looking at the build up to the only time that human beings have ever utilized the atomic bomb on a group of other human beings. But the story is not really about that. It's about kind of the build up to that, but very loosely. I don't know exactly what it's trying to get at. But I did think it was cool.
Yeah, no, well, I think because you get this worm's eye view, and it's not that I don't get the impression at all that it's supposed to make you more sympathetic to one side or the other. I think maybe it's instead of this epic major catastrophic event, it seems to be looking at like the tiny details around that. So it's almost like an impartial sort of caricaturized photograph of a part that you would always wonder about, but maybe would never see.
Yeah, that, and then I think, and why I chose the excerpt from the other alternative. So it's not even, it's about what's going to happen is going to happen. We know when the officials make the call who they're going to call. But before that point, it's highlighting that there was not just that one option. There were we don't know how many people waiting by a red telephone, and we don't know how many other things could have gone into effect. We just get a snapshot of one of the other alternatives and how absurd it really sounded. But maybe that's the point it's making.
Maybe, yeah.
It could very easily have been something completely different.
Okay,
and an absurd way that,
yeah.
Yeah.
I buy that. I think that's a good way of putting it. Like at a certain critical point, there's any other number of little roads or paths that things could have taken. And this is kind of exploring it through the avenue of fiction, what some of those might have been like. And then the excerpt, which we haven't really talked about, but I really enjoyed. I think it was another cool way to give a sense of the atmosphere. So on the one hand, you have this sort of at the dawn of the Cold War, and this kind of Kubrickish or Vonnegut or kind of vaguely absurdist, but also extremely paranoid military environments. But then you also get this kind of film noir effect with the woman, because she's talking about Europe, and there's these kind of sweeping blasé kind of cultural comparisons. So the way in which like cultural sensitivity functions in a military context or in a government context, maybe that makes more sense, and an official context was really interesting to me, because I don't know, I find cultural comparisons fascinating, and people's perspective of cultural differences really interesting.
Yeah, well, the operative did, he seemed so in awe of her and what she, her, as you said, her sweeping denouncements of different cultures that she had every right in his mind to say, merely because she was European, and certainly because she was French and he found her attractive. So everything that she says he finds fascinating, and she speaks with authority because she's the only non-American on the team.
Which is super interesting in itself too, and I think it works really well to give a sense of the way the global pieces kind of interconnect, but not in a way that you would necessarily expect, because it is, and like what that could mean, and also the ways in which certain European groups came to the U.S. during and after World War II. So most famously there, and this is what Kubrick's film suggests, is that the U.S. became an asylum for Hitler Naziist factions, as did Argentina and other Latin American countries. And so there's this, what Kubrick's film suggests is that basically Nazism takes over America and becomes like the number one advice, which I mean, and other people have also kind of hinted at it, because I mean, it's all kind of conspiracy and whatever, but anyway, there's the weird complicities that the U.S. has abroad. I always find really interesting, because I tend to be quite critical of our foreign interventions. So maybe that's my own inflection on that. Well, let's go to the second story.
Okay.
Which is like enormously all right. So the totally different tone and totally different sense of waiting. I'm not even sure if I would necessarily say, if you just read that one to me, if I would say that it's about waiting. Although it is, and there's a tradition, a very small tradition, of stories that start out with a seemingly banal everyday scenario, like a traffic jam or a delay at the airport, and then you take it to this extreme. You close everything off and you see how people would behave. So like Luis Buñuel, who's a Spanish film director and a surrealist, and he's amazing and everyone should see him. But Luis Buñuel creates scenarios like this, and one of the most famous one is The Exterminating Angel, in which basically a bunch of people who are very rich and very important go to this lavish dinner party. It's in Mexico City, so it's like the Mexican elite. And for some reason, they can't leave. They just can't cross out the door, and no one understands why, and it's never explained. They just can't. And so what happens and how their rules of behavior fall apart is really interesting. And I think it was really cool how you, and there's another movie called Habemos Papa, or something like that. We Have a Pope. It's Nanni Moretti, who's like an Italian director. And basically they're in between popes and there's like a freeze. And basically you get all these cardinals and they kind of start doing things kind of like you were describing, like playing volleyball while they're away. So you get these great scenes, like a bunch of cardinals playing volleyball, which we've all wanted to see always. Yeah. But I mean, so back to the things that you actually described. So basically you take this seemingly, this, you know, a very commonplace kind of waiting thing, not this epic historical event, but like something that has happened to most or all of us. And then you explore it to its like, or, you know, in this story, whoever wrote it, explored to like the conclusion. So there's like a sequence of reactions. And the first one is ludic. They just play. When you wait, time is suspended, basically. And when time is suspended, there's no consequences. And so they organize like an Olympiad and they play. And there's some great descriptions and details of how that works. And then it takes another turn and things get much darker and much more violent. So there's the ludic turn and then there's the bloodshed turn. Seems to be the two like stages of what people actually do when they're left to their own devices. And of that enormous bloodshed, it related in this remarkably blasé manner very, very quickly. Only 3 people survive. A Mongolian child, a woman from some country whose name I don't remember, and someone else.
The Canadian accountant, the woman from Ghana, and the Mongolian boy.
A woman from Ghana, Canadian accountant, and Mongolian. Okay. So, but I think there's this enormous chaos that, like I was saying, like borders on surrealism, because you get these bizarre juxtapositions, but at the same time, nothing supernatural actually takes place. And that seems to be the line that the story is walking between the totally outrageous, but still plausible and in an extreme condition, and the like no longer possible. And so there's this great excerpt, and the excerpt actually doesn't explore so much the laws of, you know, suspended time as it does like economy, right? And then you get these great excerpts, I think the details are amazing. Like how much, like, because I imagine, or I don't know what you were imagining when you read this, but I imagine those what are they called? The duty-free shops in airports, you know, with like the creams and the giant Toblerones and the giant bottles of vodka. Mm-hmm. And you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
They have these ridiculous products that only exist in airports.
It's true.
Like literally like a Toblerone that's like the size of like a small bridge or a baseball bat or something. And what the exchange value becomes, because very few things at duty-free shops are actually useful, like a $5,000 like diamond cream or whatever.
As opposed to what the entire airport has 2 boxes of tampons.
Yes, exactly. So the exchange rates become really interesting, and a new economy is born out of like total, just all the laws are suspended, I guess. So I don't know if I have like questions about, but maybe if what you think about, do you think of it as like a surrealist piece? Like, do you think it has like surrealist qualities? And do you think it's significant that the 3 survivors are from the 3 countries named? Or is that just total happenstance?
I think it's happenstance. As far as it being surrealist, yeah. it's pushing the boundaries as far as it possibly can without going overboard. And then it still does go overboard. Like a meteor randomly hits the airport and the people in the airport are watching the TV because they feel the crash, and they look and they see a report of a bunch. They don't know how many people are dead and like another wing, but the flight personnel are like, well, fortunately, nothing has impacted. You imagine this very calm. Would you like some more purple tea? Our flight is still fine. We should be leaving any moment now, which is repeated over the course of X number of days as they're just waiting and becoming more and more insane.
Could you maybe comment actually more on the tone? Because it's a tone of like remarkable detachment from the direness of the situation.
It's very detached, so there's not any one character to really focus on. It's, to an extent, the Canadian accountant and the woman from Ghana. Those are the ones that we know the most about. We know who their ex-spouses were, and that one of them, the warlord, is steadily heading towards the airport to reclaim his wife, the woman from Ghana. But there's never really a connection to any one of the characters. They're all passengers. With their own kind of unique and bizarre and very cultural stories. We get the impression that this is a very international airport, probably not in the US, because there are the Cubans and the Hondurans and the Canadians and the Mongolians and the people from Ghana, and this is we don't know where this is, but it's somewhere where there's a cholera outbreak sweeping through a city and soldiers surrounding the airport. And it was very hard to locate, and there's a lot of rules that it doesn't follow. It feels like a very visual story because of all the details. Finished in some ways because you never get the chance to identify or get any sense of like loss or real repercussions. Maybe because of the ludic part in the beginning. And then it was like, yeah, first they had an Olympics, and then they all killed each other, and and then they exchanged bottles of Moet. It certainly highlights the absurdity far above the emotionality.
Yes, for sure. And then there was there's a great line in the excerpt. I mean, it was totally amusing. I like airplane stories. I realized, like, contained scenarios. There's Almodovar has a comedy called, I think it's in English, it's translated as I'm So Excited, but basically it presupposes a scenario in which an airplane leaves Madrid and then just circles around Toledo for like 15 hours, and all the passengers have to be narcotized. And then there's like a whole gothic story with a plane where like someone died on it. It's haunted, which is like an amazing thing to imagine. For some reason, the idea of a haunted plane.
That is incredible, because haunted ships, the ghost ships, and
right.
But to have a haunted plane, it's not like a ship where the plague struck the ship and all the crew is dead when they reach the port. Because if that would happen in a plane, it would just crash into a mountain or the ocean.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, you can imagine the haunted ruin of an airplane underwater or crashed into a jungle. But to imagine a haunted plane flying still with like many people circulating through it is hilarious.
Well, because there's no sense of time on an airplane. And you definitely, maybe your mind, you always want to think that you're on a pretty new plane. You don't want to think, wow, I'm on this plane that's been around since like 1894. Like that's
been around the block a time or two.
But like, and because it's such a sterile environment, like a hotel room or something, and like a nice-ish hotel, like a Hilton, maybe not a super nice, but like a nice hotel room. Like there's the whole point of a hotel room is to abolish all sense of the past. So unless it's like The Shining or something, like you're not going to have a sense. So anyway, that's one of the reasons why I think that the airport environment is kind of interesting. There's that one. There's Snakes on the Plane, which I've not seen, but I have seen.
Oh, you should.
Should
I love the movie.
Of course you do.
It's just, who doesn't fantasize about things like that when you're waiting for an airplane at the end and it's inevitably delayed? Samuel L. Jackson or meteors striking part of the airport, and then
because you realize though how the whole airport scenario is, I mean, it's extremely bizarre. You go into this like very contained place that has these totally different rules about, and no tactility to it at all, and these like giant artificial expensive things that you would never want under any circumstances, and the lighting is weird and nothing is cozy, and then you go in this tube and you are like hurled at 600 miles per hour into another similar like portal. Like, it's a very bizarre thing.
It's its own unique universe, really. It's an alternate reality, and that's why I think it lends itself to surrealism.
Totally. I totally agree. I haven't seen that movie. I just saw the trailer. Tom Hanks is like, he plays some guy from some Eastern European country.
Yeah, I don't think that I know. I saw it in theaters when it first came out. I don't know that I would recommend. I wouldn't recommend it. I do know I wouldn't recommend it. But it does deal. It deals with the kind of limbo that you're dealing with. And
yes, I didn't want to see it because I thought it looked cheesy, like a cheesy romantic comedy. But the idea that if you're in an airport, you're not actually in the country, so you're not actually anywhere at all, I found kind of interesting. Like, it's a no place.
It is, and I've experienced this when like military airports in Japan. We landed on the way to Korea into a military airport. It was this giant cement block structure with like 400 people sitting in there waiting with our big army green bags and like 2 toilets, and we're waiting there for 2 hours. And then we go down the plane, and it's like we can sort of see in the distance like an outline of Japan, but it doesn't count as you actually having been to Japan, like even having set foot on Japanese soil or concrete, as it were, because it's not.
Right. Yeah, and you don't get the passport stamps. You just don't enter. You're neither in one place nor another place, even though you're on dry land. Is that Gus or?
Yeah, that's Gus. That was my cat.
Hi, Gus. I wanted to say that my last comment on this one before I have to guess is the line where the woman says that she has been in similar situation and always everything goes bad.
Like, yeah, I mean, you believe her too. She's running from a warlord husband. I completely credit it.
Like, what, you've been in a situation similar to this situation?
Several similar ones.
All right, so now we get to the part where I reveal that I have no idea at all, like even remotely.
Well, when you just described them,
hard.
It occurred to me that maybe I made them less similar than I thought that they were, because I thought that there were some pretty strong connections between the two that I'd established, and now that you've gone over it, I don't know.
Well, no, I think that there's the relationship between a dramatic, waiting, suspenseful situation, and then once you create a world in suspense, the suspense can have very different rules. So I think it's actually quite interesting. I feel like I would like to like write an essay comparing these two stories, and I can make it super meta, and I could use like Benjamin and all these things about time. That the point of cinema is nothing more and nothing less than expanding and contracting the passage of time. So I think when you're talking about waiting, you're ultimately talking about the way fiction can change your perception of how time is passing. But then what actions occur within that expansion or contraction can be quite different. Yeah, so I have no idea. I can see you writing both, but that's not really helpful because often we pick stories that we would have liked to have written with us and our twisted sensibilities. Yeah, I know that you're very capable of coming up with all of the details in the second one, because I think that one was extremely rich in details. I think you're, obviously since you have a military background, my surface inclination would be like, oh, you would write the military one, but you very seldom do that because you're not really a very military person.
But haven't you seen my hair? It's a Star Wars military chic.
Are you allowed to? Can you wear that? Is that uniform?
No. Definitely
Really?
not. No, it would
Why
be
not?
considered faddish.
Is that a term?
Yes, that's a term in a regulation. You can't have faddish haircuts. I couldn't shave my head as a woman in the military because that would be faddish. I couldn't have a man.
But a man can.
Yes, it wouldn't be faddish if he did it.
So, is the military sexist?
Yes, we've just
No.
Yes. They're trying to be better.
And I salute them, no pun intended, for their attempts.
No, I do believe that they lead at the front in terms of racial and gender equality when it comes to American culture. But yes, they are sexist.
Well, there's an interesting comment that is kind of suggests that a more or objective third-person detached narrative. In the first one, when they described what men in uniforms and three-piece suits, which are another kind of uniform, which is a sentiment that I totally share, right? Like the difference between structures of obedience and power are not always so absolute, and is a corporation that much different from the army is a great question. But I liked that little detail quite a lot. It doesn't help me guess though, so it's no use to me now. Okay, so yeah, you could have written either. I'm going to guess, and not because it's a military thing, but because of a very slight switch in tone that between the summary and the excerpt. I feel like they could have been from two different stories. I almost feel like, and that leads me to believe that which is not a slight or anything like that. It just suggests to me something similar to the process of writing these is well, I'm being not articulate. One of the experiences that I've had writing these things is that there can often be a disconnect between the experience of writing a summary and the experience of writing an excerpt, and sometimes the tone will shift. Whereas if you do actually take a story and then excerpt it, consistency and tone. I could be wrong about that, or maybe you're better at this than I am. You are better at this than I am because you are technically winning. But I'm going to guess that you wrote the first one.
I did write the first one.
Yay!
and I was struggling with that very thing that you picked up on, the consistency of tone, because as you've noticed by the sense of not dissonance, but disconnectedness in the second story, where everything is very kind of at a distance and horrific, it's all written in a very kind of cold sort of, this happened and then this happened and then this happened, and no attention is paid more to one thing than the other. And it comes across in the summary as well as the story. And I could get that with my summary, but with the story, it was very challenging for me to capture. And
with an excerpt, yeah, because usually the excerpt is like where you want to go like a little bit deeper. Also, and now I can say this with more. I didn't want to be proven wrong. Wait, 1 second. Oh man, I'm not wearing pants. Everyone's gonna see.
I'll make noise. So
yeah, keep talking while I'm gone, so the camera doesn't go anywhere.
This isn't cool. All right, so Non-Existent Story listeners, as Kesey goes to answer whoever just rang at the door, not wearing pants, I can tell you about my cat, Gus. He's an orange tabby cat. You can't see him right now. He's an asshole, but I love him.
Okay,
I'm back.
Good cover. Thank you. It's just a side note, I never wear pants for this podcast. It brings me good luck, as it does in so many other situations in my life. We'll leave that one there. What I was also going to say is that I feel like you're too nice of a person, maybe, to be able to maintain.
Kill everybody off.
Well, yeah, I think that extremely cold tone would be hard. Wait, keep talking.
Oh God. Gus's move now, listeners. He's I don't know if that covered or not because she was walking quite loudly. You might have still seen her pantless. If you are listening, not from YouTube, I hope this convinces you to watch us on YouTube, where you can see all of these kind of scandalous things. I wonder who's at the door. So she's in Chicago and I'm in Arizona. I don't know who lives around her in her apartment building, but she's a very social person. She knows a lot of people. So it could be anyone in or outside of Chicago. We must ask. We must remember to ask when she comes back. Just now.
And I'm back.
All right.
Okay. Good job, Hannah. Way to cover. So that was not relevant to this podcast, but someone who owns the car that I've been borrowing was coming to retrieve it, and I did not know about it. But yeah, so I'm back. So tell me who wrote the second one.
This is much more contemporary than how I usually go. So the second one was written by a man named Roy Kesey. It was a short story that was published originally in the Kenyon Review in 2006 and then republished in the 2007 edition of the American Short Stories as edited by Stephen King, which is where I discovered it.
Okay. Yeah, those have some good ones in there sometimes.
They do. It's a veritable treasure trove. So there's 20, and I've found about 3 that I liked. But that one stuck out because I was like, I could have written this, but probably not nearly as well. But I really like it.
I think you could have. I mean, you're very capable of coming up with very surprising details, because I think that's the real strength of this story is the naming of cigarette brands and the naming of the champagne. Like that part is really, it makes it work really well, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool. He was a brilliant. I thought it was brilliant. In fact, I found him on Facebook, and I almost asked him if he would be my friend. And I was like, maybe if he says yes and he sees that I referenced his story, even if I give credit, he might not appreciate it. So I'll be a fan from a distance.
No, I think he would. Publicity. People like publicity. People love. I think. Well, here we'll publish it on Facebook. The podcast, and then you'll ask, and maybe I'll ask too. We should. I'm working a side note, on the topic of Facebook. People have different feelings about being Facebook friends with people who share annoying political beliefs that are violently in contrast to one's own. I'm increasingly of the opinion that one should just curate one's Facebook friends very well, and then you find out about cool stuff that you care about, and not someone saying something totally offensive or outrageous. So that's where I'm at. I just unfriended.
And yeah, no, I have gone through that as well very recently in this, as we had referenced before, an election year. Although maybe it's good to have friends who you find are actually extremists in one section or another, so you get equal balances of extreme obnoxious politicalness.
That's true.
It's very draining. It's very draining at the same time. It can be very emotional to read when you just want to look at cat videos or something, and you end up.
Yeah, well, I just think that there are people who share really interesting things that I love learning about. So if this is, a talented writer who's creative, he would probably share interesting things on Facebook. And I like knowing about those things, as opposed to someone being like, I hope this football player who didn't salute the flag gets his legs broken tonight, which I don't need that. There's no point in engaging with that person. This is just an example off the top of my head, has no relationship at all.
Oh God, yeah.
So long story short, the more people that you have on Facebook, Facebook is as good as your friends. So the more people you have doing interesting, cool things, I think the better.
Yes. But also not exactly like you, because then you get into this kind of bizarre. You think everybody thinks a certain way when they don't.
Oh yeah, no, I know no one thinks remotely like me. I think I'm totally special.
Or you start to think that you're the only one who thinks the way you do and that you're unique when in fact you are not. So it's a balance, as I said.
Yes. I guess it depends on if you want it as a kind of a barometer of what's going on in the world, or if you want it as a source of interesting and delightful things. And it depends. I'm fine with it being political when it's about other countries, because I am more detached. When it's political on my own country, I find that I get riled up. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Side note. So tell me a little bit then about your process of, so you read this story, you came across it. This is your new secret weapon.
I don't know. There's actually only a couple that I really liked all that much. I mean, they're all, of course, really? I mean, they're better writers than I am, but I was only really drawn to a couple of them. And it was kind of last minute because I'd already decided on a vastly different topic that I would focus on before I came across the story. And I had to backtrack rather violently. So maybe I'll bring up that other one at a later time. But I just fell in love with his short story, which is called Wait.
It's called Wait? Okay.
It's called Wait. It's all about waiting. So Wait by
So
Roy
his name
Kesey.
is Roy Kesey, Kesse?
Roy, Kesey.
Ah, that's like my name almost.
Mm-hmm.
Wait. Okay. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of coincidentally came across that and you decided to radically shift your direction.
Yes, very radically shift. So the one I came up with had absolutely nothing to do with what I was originally thinking about, but I was pretty happy with how it turned out, except, as you pointed out, for the disconnect in tones. But
I think it works. It works in a way. Although I think they're both. You could look at both of these stories, like, I think very politically, because they do, from unusual approaches. I think they touch on, like, major political issues. I mean, like, violence in airports is a thing. It's a timely issue, and I don't think that it's bad to approach it with humor or anything like that. I just think that it raises certain questions and issues that you could also talk about, like whether or not this is kind of making us more aware or less aware or things like that. I mean, I think with the waiting, what seems to be at stake in these kinds of stories is not so much politics, but rather like something more like quote unquote universal, like human nature. Like what are kind of like Lord of the Flies, right? Or Lost, or any of those like stranded on a desert island kind of things. Like, what do you do in extreme situations? How does human nature operate? What kind of violences do we revert to? The other story I was going to mention that actually I haven't read it or seen the movie, but I need to. But there's a short story by Julio Cortázar in which it proposes an eternal traffic jam. Like a traffic jam that goes on for like 2 weeks. Like,
I've seen a Doctor Who episode that was like that.
Oh, really? I would like to. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a Jean-Luc Godard movie called Weekend, which is supposedly based on that. So because Cortázar is a writer that has been important for me at certain points in my life, and Godard is kind of the preeminent like French postmodern director. I've been meaning to see those both for a while, but I feel like this kind of fits into that theme and would probably be considered more postmodern than surrealist now that I think about it. But that's maybe just a semantic debate that wouldn't really go anywhere. I don't know. Potato is what I'm saying. Yes. And then what were your kind of, where did you get your ideas from?
From the news. Well, I was thinking about absurd situations. As you know, I have an affinity for absurdity in writing as well as life, hence my hairstyles. So I was thinking about the airport and how it's just really an observation of things escalating out of control and things that are out of control, how they affect you and then how you react. So that was why it was important. You have these kind of faceless, nameless government officials. I mean, people are familiar with that idea, that concept, because when you don't understand how that system kind of works, it's easy to make it some evil, faceless, nameless corporation type thing. So you have that, and they're somewhere making a decision for completely random and obscure and ridiculous reasonings. You could have had a whole separate story just on their conversation of how they made the decision that they made and which red phone that they would call, which would have been interesting. But I like that you have these two different men in two different situations. One is more absurd than the other. The smell, the U.S. government standard bathroom malodor. I did not make any of that up, by the way. It is all completely true. I referenced the research conducted by Mary Roach, a book that I had brought up in a previous episode about, what was it called? It was called Grunt. Yes. So she looks into, she looks into this historical situation, which had previously been confidential and top secret. 17 days after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, the project Who Me had been approved, but it was too late now. The objective of it had been, you supply these little capsules of very foul-smelling chemical to the Chinese resistance. And the Chinese resistance would go into offices where German and Japanese officers were going to meet to discuss whatever. And they would activate the capsules and leave. And so when these officials walked into the room, they would be ashamed because someone would think the other one had farted or something when they hadn't. And
they're going to stink bomb. It was a
stink bomb concept, and it was called that particular odor, U.S. government standard bathroom malodor, wasn't the one that they used. It was called Who Me. The bathroom malodor wasn't developed till some years later, along something of a similar vein. But yes, that is all true, and it was a big team that was working on it, and it was, I thought, hysterical that I didn't have to make up an alternative to what could have been the atomic bomb dropping on Japan. It could have been stink bombs in offices, making government officials feel very embarrassed.
Yes, I kind of wish that we had done that. I think that would have been better. But it's interesting that the ways in which so there's 2 points I wanted to make. One about, the notion of this, an organization, any large-scale organization that has weapons that are extremely destructive at its beck and call, and how when you look at how the power actually operates in that organization, like what you see is something that's kind of faceless and nameless, and people are motivated by something else, but then you look for the person who's controlling them, and then someone else is actually controlling that person, and you're always looking for the source, and the source kind of tends to elude you. So there's this like elusivity of power and responsibility, and it all becomes somehow like this giant impersonal machine that people are caught up in, even the perpetrators. So like that was kind of conveyed. And then, oh man, yeah, I forget what I was going to say about the second point, but then what should have been, it makes me think of a comic that I'm reading right now that I'll talk about probably in another podcast.
Well, it makes me think about the Nuremberg trials, the way that you just described it, the sense of trying to find justice by holding a person accountable, and then as soon as you get your hands on that person and explain their dilemma, it becomes, well, someone else was really accountable, and it never stops.
Yeah. Although then you can also say, well, maybe ethics is not just saying, is being disobedient, right? So on the one hand, they're not accountable, but on the other hand, they are. There's this tension between human law and moral law that kind of emerges. So quotes, I think it was, and I haven't read that, and I need to, on Hannah Arendt's book on the banality of evil.
Oh my God, I'm still trying to find that, actually, but I saw the film Hannah Arendt, and it goes into it at least to a degree.
Did you like the film?
I did. I thought that the actress playing Hannah Arendt was very impressive.
Okay. Yeah. No, I that's been on my list for a while. I enjoy reading her a lot, and her The Human Condition I liked. She's a great writer. She has a good sense of flow, and a total genius. Like she would kind of think about what she would want to write, and then she would just write it. But like she'd think out the book and then just write the book, which as someone who's written dissertation, like that's not how it works.
Well, that's how
I'll just do it in this order, and then I just write.
I think that's how Da Vinci sculpted too. I think it was
Picasso. It's a sign of genius if you can conceptualize these extremely elaborate things.
That comes across in the film too. It's a lot of time just watching her kind of smoke a cigarette and lie in different places and think, and then brief moments of activity and she's done. But mostly it's just people calling her like, when will you be done? And she's like, oh, I'm working on it. And she puts the phone back down and she just keeps smoking her cigarette and looking out the window.
But she is, right? Like that is like that thought is extremely like, if you have a day in which you think a lot, even if you don't move, it's like very tiring. So it's not always visible, but it's just that most of us find it hard to retain all of that in a logical form because, you know, our memories aren't as strong or whatever. But yeah, no, I find that stuff fascinating. Well, how are we doing on time?
I don't know, but I think that we've covered everything. Mine would have been called Limbo.
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
And that's what I wrote.
Limbo. But don't you think limbo is like, I mean, that's specifically Catholic. Do you want to be specifically Catholic?
Oh, I think it might have started out that way, but I don't think the word limbo belongs to the Catholic Church anymore. And I was originally going to say island in limbo, but then that felt too specific. I was like, no. But I need a word that
you have to bend backwards to go under.
That's not limbo.
Let's do it's a very similar word.
It's a similar word.
Anyway, I haven't done it in a while, apparently.
Yeah.
Let's do the limbo. It's not limbo. Are you sure it's not limbo?
Yes.
Mambo number 5. Yeah. Alas, will never appear on this podcast because it's probably copyrighted. All right. So, but you would go. All right. So I don't take this as what it's worth. I don't feel that Limbo is the best title.
Maybe I'll reinvestigate it. I don't feel that the music archives gave me the best options for what I was to select. I ended up being stuck with like finding something kind of French for both.
Oh, no, actually, well, yeah. I mean, I actually really liked the accordion choice for the first one.
Yeah, I think it kind of emphasized the French woman more than I'd originally anticipated.
It did. Yeah, it did. I thought it actually worked because it gave this kind of eclectic feel to it, which is again tricky if you're trying to establish consistency in tone. But I wasn't expecting it after the setup, and then it kind of started to work. And then I think the sense of everything falling apart and it being the end is captured really well in A Christmas Carol because it's the end of the year and there's this sense of like good night. So it's Oh Holy Night, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that this weird, ironic sense of ending that's totally detached and totally irreverent was totally good. I think Roy Kesey would approve.
I hope so.
It could be like, You should Facebook friend him and be like, so I read part of this out loud and I read it out loud to this version of Oh Holy Night and see what he says.
And I hope that was cool. I love you. I didn't say
Oh yes. You'd be surprised. You'd think someone's really famous because they wrote a short story and it got selected, but frequently most of the time they're just like trying to make a living and it's still pretty cool if they get a fan.
That is not the case. We should end this podcast now before we get any further into it on the off chance that he might watch it at some point.
Okay, yes. All right, before we get
and even though I was talking, I should say that because of the sound of your feet walking on the floor, you may have flashed some of our viewers. It's possible.
I mean, at least I was wearing underwear.
That's true.
Yes. All right. We'll end there.
Okay.